So today I set out to answer the question, do you need the Peter McKinnon $250 variable ND filter? Or would that money be better off spent on something else? Now before you skip to the footage and before you look at the examples, I want you to watch this video all the way through because the answer for each of you may be different. And this isn't a video where I'm trying to tell you what to do or what not to do. What I'm really trying to do is lay out the case in front of you, whether spending this kind of money on a variable ND filter is worth it for you. And the first series of shots we're going to look at here are fixed shots. There is very little movement, and the purpose of this is to see whether we get a degradation in detail or image quality, or if there's any significant color cast or change in colors by using the filter. And I first shot with that house. I felt both of those were reasonably consistent as far as color goes and sharpness. And here's a little shot of the forest, a little bit of a more natural environment. I did find that there was a bit of a change in color without the ND filter. The green seemed a little bit more vibrant. Here's just to check sharpness, and we're having a look, and if you compare these two shots, you're going to find the one with the ND filter off is slightly sharper, but not enough that it would really, I think, matter to me or anybody else that was really using it. And here's another just natural motion of the grass blowing in the wind. And between having an ND filter on and having an ND filter off, I really couldn't tell any difference. So in looking at those series of shots, I really couldn't tell the difference between ND filter on and ND filter off. I think if you didn't put them side by side or back to back, you wouldn't even really know. So clearly for a locked off shot where there isn't a lot of movement, there's going to be virtually no difference between using the ND filter and not using the ND filter. Keeping in mind the goal of the ND filter is to slow your shutter speed down so the motion in the video looks more natural. And since we have very little motion, it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that there isn't a whole lot of difference between the two shots. Now in the next series of shots, I'm going to add some motion with the camera, and we're going to see if we can tell any difference between the ND filter on and the ND filter off with those shots. Now here's one, a little bit of a sort of a vlogging style, just a shot of me. I did underexpose this first shot a little bit, which is one of the challenges with the ND filter. You do have to have it tuned in just right. And between these two shots, the main difference I notice is just the fact that the exposure is different. But in the motion and the blur, I'm not noticing much. Now here is a panning shot. Once again in this shot I do notice that the greens are a little bit muted in this first shot, just a little bit. And then when you look at the second shot with the ND filter off, they are just ever so slightly more vibrant, but not enough that I think you'd notice unless you were looking at them back to back. Now here is sort of a brick pile or brick wall, and I'm sort of it's got some sharp edges, so I thought by panning with that we might get an idea of what the motion looks like and the sharpness. And I swing it around to myself and just kind of see how that looks again, and I think that looks fine. And now here's the second one. Between these two shots, once again, I am not noticing a very significant difference, and I don't think if you didn't have them back to back, you would even be able to tell the difference. After these series of clips, I'm already thinking there's hardly any difference. I think if I didn't have ND filter on and ND filter off labeled on there, I'm not sure that I would even know the difference. I could probably mix these clips up and nobody would even know. But as we go through this, have a look and see if you can see the difference. And at the end, I'm going to come back and there's going to be a section where I'm just going to give you a series of cinematic shots, a whole series with the ND filter on and another series with it off, and I'm going to see if you can tell the difference. Now certainly of all the shots I did to test this out, this is where you really see the biggest difference, and that is with the motion of this waterfall. You see with the ND filter off, it looks like it's with a GoPro. It's very frozen. It doesn't look natural. That's really not what your eyes see whatsoever. Here's a close-up. That looks very natural. Could be right out of a movie. Very smooth as the water comes down. That's what your eyes would see, I think. And then here is that very GoPro frozen, unnatural looking. So Certainly when it comes to water, shooting water, whether it be a waterfall or a flowing river or something like that, I definitely saw a significant difference between using the ND filter and not using the ND filter. And through this entire series of tests, this is the one thing that really showed the difference in using the ND filter or not. Now, this next one's just going to be a little bit of a vlog test, so it's just me walking and talking. Keep in mind, I did underexpose once again that first shot using the variable ND filter, so there is a slight change in exposure between the two shots, but that is just user error. It really has nothing to do with the ND filter. One of the advantages of the ND filter is actually it's reflecting my face, and since this particular camera I'm using, I don't have a flip-up screen that I can see myself in, it does allow me to see what I'm filming, which is, I don't know, I suppose it's an advantage. But anyways, I'm not sure how it'll deal with the changes in light and shadows, and also we'll see how the motion looks. Does this look like a natural motion as I'm walking, or is it is it jittery, or is it just blur when I move? Blurring is this motion blur concept, and the jittering is when there is no ND filter and you have a very high shutter speed, then you get the jittering or the abrupt movement. Okay, now this is the other way. This is with the ND filter off, and we'll see how this looks. Can you see? It should be that the motion, and when I step, it should be a more abrupt sort of juddery motion rather than a sort of a smearing or blurring of the image. And that is what we talk about when we say motion blur. With this, without the ND filter, there really shouldn't be much motion blur. It should be sort of frozen and jittery. And with the ND filter, you should see a sort of a smearing or a blurring of the image, which is supposed to be more natural. I probably should have shot this not walking up a steep hill. So after looking at that, other than the difference in exposure, I didn't think there was that much of a difference. I mean, once again, not a difference that you wouldn't notice unless you were looking at them back to back. So this is another case, a sort of vlogging, talking to the camera situation where I really don't see much value in using an ND filter. Now, this next series of shots involves an actual moving subject and camera movement. So we're going to introduce a lot of movement here. And theoretically, if we're going to see a difference, this should be the shot that we see it in. The ND filter is there to create a more natural motion blur when there is movement. And due to camera movement and subject movement, if we're going to see a difference, this is where we should see it. Now, this is just a little bird looking for its lunch, just popping along on the rocks. And this shot looks fine, ND filter on. And here it is with it off. The image maybe looks a little bit crisper, but once again, I don't think you're going to notice a huge difference unless you're looking at them back to back, and even then I can't really tell much of a difference. Here he is again, just a little bit of movement, ND filter on, and here he is once again. I'm not really seeing any difference that matters to me, at least. Maybe you'll see something different. Now, with people walking and people moving, this is a big one they talk about. So here I'm walking towards the camera. This is full sun. I come down, have a look at the camera. We're just going to look at the motion blur and the movement. I mean, that looked pretty normal, I think. I didn't see anything unusual there. That's with the ND filter on. And here it is with it off, and once again, I just can't really see much of a difference whatsoever. Now here's following some ducks. So I'm moving and the ducks are moving. So I think if we're going to see a difference, here's another place that you would think would be seeing the difference. ND filter on, ND filter off. Not seeing a whole lot of difference. There is possibly a little bit of shift in the colors here. Maybe the images with the ND filter on are a little bit more brown, and off they've got a little bit more green, and they're a little bit more crisp, but keep in mind that crispness is maybe the absence of motion blur. All right, now I think this is the moment of the truth. This is the whole point of the video. I've got sequence A and sequence B. And one of them was shot with the ND filter on, and the other one was shot with the ND filter off. You've seen them labeled with ND filter on and ND filter off. Now I'm going to give them to you unlabeled. And what we're looking for here, the idea of this motion blur is it's supposed to make the image more cinematic. So look at these two series of shots and then tell me, before I tell you which is which, in the comments down below, tell me which one you thought was more cinematic, or if you could tell any difference at all. All right, so the whole point of this video was to determine whether you should spend the $250 on the Peter McKinnon variable ND filter or the $450 on the 2-filter set. This is a huge amount of money. You can buy used lenses, vintage lenses, a lot of new lenses. You could buy a second camera body. More importantly, you could get training in video production. There's a lot of ways you could spend that money. Is it worth spending it on an ND filter? And the first thing I've got to come clean on is these weren't shot with the Peter McKinnon variable ND filter. These were shot with a $20 filter from Amazon. So if you thought that they looked okay and you think you need an ND filter, you're probably better off to just buy one of these cheap generic $20 filters, get you started. And once you're a YouTuber with 1 million subscribers, you can go ahead and get the $550 filter kit. That's fine. The second thing I would say is if your videos are so boring that people are watching them and saying, oh, that doesn't have motion blur, you're probably not producing a very good or interesting video. So I don't think to the average person, myself included, an ND filter of this cost is going to make much difference at all. And third, I'd like to say, even though I think if you've got the money and you want to use an ND filter, there's no doubt, there's tons of reviews that this Peter McKinnon set of filters is an excellent quality filter. But even Peter McKinnon in the beginning, if you watch some of his old videos, you'll see him joking with Maddie that Peter never used the variable ND filters. He just didn't use an ND filter in his earlier stuff. Now he's got his own ND filter now, and he probably uses it, and he is getting a very high quality production for his videos and his YouTube channel. But I would suggest he got hundreds of thousands, maybe even 1 million subscribers, I don't know, before he started using the ND filters. So I would suggest that the thing that is going to hold you back from the best quality video production is not the ND filters at all, and certainly it is not the quality or price you pay for your ND filter. If you're interested in budget video production, you have come to the right channel, because this channel is all about getting the best possible results with the lowest cost equipment. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot more content like this coming up. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.